Okay, so let's get started here. In the past year, the Guidebook mobile app platform has taken some giant leaps and bounds when it comes to functionality, and sometimes even I have a hard time remembering all the awesome things that we've released. That's one of the reasons that we're doing this series of webinars now. We want you to be able to take advantage of all of the awesome new stuff that we're offering and hear directly from our experts about how to make the most of it. Today we're talking about a hot button issue for many of you. Regardless of the industry you're in, we're talking about engagement. Now, mobile apps are actually great for getting people engaged with your message and content. We already know that people spend a lot of time on their devices, and chances are you were interested in Guidebook in the first place because somewhere along the line you thought to yourself, there has to be a way for me to get this information into an app. We are very aware of this. And when we're making product decisions and deciding what features go into the app, we're constantly thinking about this, and it's actually been the inspiration for one of our biggest product releases to date, which we're going to talk about here in a bit. It's called Interact. Interact is a social feed that allows your app users to connect with each other and experience your app's content in an unprecedented way. We'll take a deep dive into it here in a minute, along with some other features that are custom made for increasing your audience engagement. So let's get to it. First, I want to introduce our Guidebook experts that we have on the line today. We have Aaron Ebert, one of our in-house Guidebook product experts. He talks to customers around the world to find out their needs and makes sure that those are being integrated into Guidebook's future releases. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
We also have Matthew McHugh on the line. Matthew is a Senior Customer Success Associate at Guidebook. He's spent the past 2 years helping clients build guides that exceed their expectations, and we are happy to have you here today, Matthew. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jordan. Happy to be here, and happy to see a lot of familiar names in the attendees participants list, so hi to all of you.
That's great. Matthew interacts with a lot of Guidebook clients throughout the day, so I wouldn't be surprised if his voice is familiar with you. I want to open it up to both of you guys right off the bat and try to set some context here. A lot of people talk about engagement these days, audience engagement, user engagement, and I want to try to at least define what it is that we're talking about at first. Aaron, when clients talk to you, when Guidebook users or clients talk to you about engagement, what does that mean to you, and how have they defined it to you in the past?
Yeah, I think everyone defines engagement a little bit differently, Jordan. But what we've kind of heard from most clients, and what we like to say at Guidebook, based on all the different clients that we speak to, is that engagement is really attracting people's attention at your event or your students' attention at your university through things like networking, meaningful discussion, participation, and digesting the content of your actual app or event. So engagement is accomplishing your event goals. So at an orientation, that might be getting students to feel more comfortable, more prepared for their first year coming in as a freshman. Or to an event planner, it might be getting your attendees to communicate with each other, with your exhibitors, learn from the speakers and the sessions that they're attending, and then leaving knowing that they're going to be repeat customers again because they were really engaged with everything that you had to offer.
Yeah, I love that idea of connecting engagement to your actual goals. We all have information that we're trying to get across. It's one of the reasons why we're using mobile technology to begin with. And you want people to interact with that information. Just putting it out into the universe doesn't necessarily do us any good. It only matters if people are really receiving the content that we intended. And I think that's a great connection there to make when we're talking about engagement. Matthew, I want to ask you the same question. How are you defining engagement? And when you're talking to clients, which you do very often, what do you find engagement means to them, or what are they looking to do to engage their audiences?
So a lot of similar things, to what Aaron had said. It's a lot for me on my end, being in customer success and working kind of on the front lines to push all that information out to our users. Engagement to me is really going to mean, being able to show them the data, all that information for their event, and having them interact with it. Doing that is going to increase their overall experience at the event itself.
Yeah, you know what I particularly like about what you said, Matthew, is you brought up the idea of data. And one of the things that I think Guidebook does really well is simply lays out app usage data for the people who are, for the administrators of the app, which can be very helpful after an event, but can be even more helpful during an event because it helps you understand how people are consuming the content within a particular guide. And oftentimes we can make reactive decisions based on that will help maybe increase engagement in ways that we didn't anticipate or plan for when we were thinking about the event beforehand. Guidebook is obviously what we would consider a tool for engagement, whatever audience it is that you're interacting with. And so a lot of times when we're thinking about how can we make Guidebook better, we're thinking about what sort of features can we put into Guidebook that would allow you to communicate better with your audience. Aaron, let's go back to you for a minute here. Overall, how does mobile technology and app usage, what sort of things about that type of technology lend itself to increasing engagement?
Well, I think that people in general in this day and age are most engaged on their phones. People check their phones all the time. I think the average amount of time spent on your phone in a day is between 8 and 10 hours. And kind of another fun fact is that Americans now this year, Deloitte did a study about 6 months ago, and Americans are now checking their phones on average 46 times a day. And for students, that goes up, so 74 times a day for students or people ages 18 to 24. So we know that people are super engaged with their phones. They can't go 5 minutes without checking what's actually happening on there. And so in order to get them to really learn and participate and, of course, cover all your bases and make sure they have everything they need at their fingertips, you have to be mobilely accessible, and you have to have a mobile app for these people to check. So I do really think that mobile ties in hand in hand with engagement and making sure that people can do all of these things that we talked about earlier that allow them to accomplish their event goals.
Yeah, and I mean, those are some actually staggering statistics when you think about it, and I think people kind of know this instinctively, whether or not they've checked the data from Deloitte, and you can just tell by walking around in the world today that people are very engaged with their mobile devices. And a lot of people, I think, find themselves asking the question, okay, well, how do I get my information onto a mobile device? And up until recently, it's been fairly, not a very accessible medium, especially when it comes to developing a custom application for a phone. And so one of the things that we're striving to do at Guidebook is to democratize that process and allow anyone to create a mobile app. Matthew, do you have any thoughts about mobile technology and the link there with engagement?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of mobile technology is like that conduit to engagement. It's at the core. So I think it's vital to kind of continue to develop that and continue to evolve our kind of skill set when it comes to reaching out and speaking to our audience and drawing information from them as well.
Great. Aaron, let's connect this a little closer to Guidebook. When we're thinking about features that are in Guidebook that are quote-unquote engagement features, what comes to mind for you, or what categories of features come to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is a couple of ways you can segment this. There's, of course, going to be like the features that allow you as an event organizer or app builder to talk to your audience throughout your event or at your university, right? So some of those could be push messages or inbox messages, sending them direct information and being able to know that they're going to see that and kind of have this communication channel with them. And then, of course, there's also the listening tool, so allowing to hear from your audience, let them raise their hand and hear what they have to say. So surveys are a great way to do that, to get feedback. Live polls is a much more interactive way to do that as well. And then lastly, social is going to be a great way, and that's what's going to bring us, I think, to talking a bit about Interact. But sharing photos, starting discussions and conversations about what's going on, making new connections. with other people at the event that you can, continue to work on and network with throughout the course of the next year or whatever time frame that might be. So I think those are kind of the 3 buckets I would divide up.
Great, and like you mentioned, Aaron, Interact is a great tool for this sort of social sharing idea and a great way to instantly make your app a social app. We'll get more into the details here soon, but it's also a very sort of low maintenance way for you to do that because Interact actually surfaces all those connections for you in the app. But before we get to that, let's talk about this idea of talking to your audience that you mentioned, Aaron. And particularly you called out the features of push notifications and the inbox inside of an app. What are those features and what are the advantages of those?
Yeah, so with communicating with your audience, there's really 2 clear ways to do that. So push notifications is going to be a much more active way of doing that. So a push notification goes to the home screen of your phone. So if your phone is locked and in your pocket, you'll get a notification right to that home screen, and you can send someone an urgent message, right? So if there's a room change that's occurring or perhaps a schedule change, you could send them a push notification to really grab their attention. There's also inbox messages within Guidebook. So that's a much more passive type of notification. So you might want to use those for something less urgent, maybe a welcome message to kind of show people right when they come into the app where they're going to look for future updates and messages throughout the conference or throughout their usage of the app. So those are kind of the 2 different options we have at Guidebook.
Yeah, I love the distinction there between active and passive. A push notification is kind of hard to avoid, and the research actually shows that push notifications have incredibly high click-through rates, which means that, because it's there on the phone home screen, if you're going to get your message across. So for those high-impact messages that you want to send, there has been a room change. There is now a cancellation due to weather. Or, if you're trying to drive someone to a particular session, you can now do that by surfacing that information directly on someone's screen. Looking at the data, like we mentioned, during an event, and if one particular session maybe isn't getting the attention that you feel it should, there's no reason that you couldn't send a push notification out to actually surface some more interest in that session. Matthew, when it comes to best practices and tips for how to best take advantage of push notifications and the inbox feature, got any tips for us there?
Yeah, certainly. So I would say, send notifications early and often. Your push type notifications, which of course are going to go to that locked screen, I would use those sparingly for things that everybody needs to know about immediately. But I like to typically send notifications at the beginning of the event, during big events, and at the end of the event. It's important really at the beginning to set that tone, with your users. They're downloading the app. Sure, there's a lot of data about the event, but let them know, this is not just a static set of data or a revolving set of data. This app is actually going to be like a 2-way conversation between you and them. So it's important to set that tone.
Great. We actually had a question come in from Kurt, and I think this is a good time to maybe address it. Aaron or Matthew, I'm not sure if we have precise data at the moment, but do you have a feeling for, is there any data about the relative engagement between push notifications versus an inbox message? Do we have any sort of evidence that inbox messages get read?
I don't think we track that, and I can follow up after this to kind of get a final word. But I will say, to help increase adoption and to increase visibility, and this is actually a good segue question, I typically like to take my notification icon, that little inbox where all those messages, whether they're push notifications or just passive notifications, they all go there. I tend to move that towards the top of my menu stack so that it's more visible. And when a user has a message that they haven't read, they're going to see a little indicator in the top right-hand corner of that icon letting them know there's a message waiting to be read. And one of the cool things, as we'll talk about Interact a little later on, is actually the notifications. All the notifications you send, whether they're push or passive, are also going to be featured right there on the Interact feed. So visibility is very high. But in terms of actually tracking down numbers read, numbers clicked, I'll have to follow up on that. I'm not quite sure.
Cool. I think that's a really good point, though. You have the power to actually make the inbox more visible in the app by maybe moving it up in the menu a little bit. One of the great tips that I like about the inbox is if you publish the guide with a message already in the inbox, when someone first opens that app, they're going to notice that they have a message right away. And that sort of trains them that this is going to be a place where I can get valuable information. And that's another tip as well. The more valuable the information that you're putting into the inbox, people will take note of that, and they'll say, okay, this is the place that I go to find out information about the particular event that I'm attending. Let's move on to this idea of listening to your audience. And we have a couple of features that Aaron mentioned, including live polls and surveys. Certainly there are more than that, but let's talk about live polls and surveys. Aaron, what exactly are they? And again, what kind of benefits do they provide?
Yeah, so surveys are great for getting feedback on something that's happened. So, whether that is a speaker who just presented, getting feedback on how people enjoyed the session, whether that's your whole conference, getting feedback on how attendees enjoyed different aspects of the conference. So it's really a great way to measure the success of your event or session or whatever you're hoping to get feedback on after it's happened. Whereas live polls are going to be much more in the moment. They're going to be instant. So live polls are a great way to kind of pull the audience in while they're actually experiencing whatever you might want feedback on. And so, a great way to use a live poll could be a speaker who's presenting and pulling it up on the screen so that everyone in the audience can see actually the results coming in real time and see those numbers and learn from them right away. And it pulls people's attention directly to that session or that speaker. So much more instant and happening in the moment.
Great. Matthew, I think it's this is the perfect opportunity to jump in and if you can give us any best practices on live polls and surveys and maybe when is it appropriate to use one or the other to listen to our audience?
Certainly. I commonly refer to both of these two as the fun poll and the formal poll. So live, and they're not mutually exclusive. So please feel free to use both throughout your event. But to give you a couple of ideas, so our survey forms, there's a multitude of different questions you can ask. It's a great way to kind of get a lot of different open-ended data from your attendees. And creating a form for such things as, like a post-event survey and dropping it right on the home screen. Or if you wanted a session-specific survey to be attached to every single session, it's a great way to get all of that formal information and then to go back and digest it, export it, sort it, and do all those fun things we like to do with our data. The live poll, the fun poll, that's the one where you can actually, we can empower the speaker or anybody there at the event to kind of set up this live poll. You can project the screen, onto a large projector, and then people can vote. The attendees can vote, and they can watch the percentage bars fight up and down. It's a lot of fun to use. So yeah, they're both great. Use both. And just bear in mind that, I like to think of the app itself, the guide, as kind of like its own ecosystem. There are other entities in the guide that can affect the other. So use your notifications to say, hey, we've got a live poll going on in this session. Or, use a push notification at the end of the event to say, hey, the feedback form for the survey event is now live. It's at the top of the menu. Please fill it out.
Great. And to even link this to engagement a little more, I think it's, there's no reason that you couldn't send out a survey in the middle of the event to kind of get a quick hit on how people are feeling about a particular session or speaker or what have you, and adjust on the fly, which I think is a great mechanism for using surveys. And live polls, obviously, getting someone involved, we're always trying to think of new ways when someone is presenting to a group to get that to be an engaging experience, and having live polls during the session that keeps the audience, actually gives the audience a voice during the speaker's presentation, incredibly engaging feature there. So great. I want to move on now to this idea of social sharing, and probably a lot of the reasons, or a lot of the reason why many of you are joining us in this webinar today is to talk about one of our newest features, which is called Interact. And Interact is really doing wonders when it comes to surfacing content to your attendees and app users right on that home screen of their app. But Aaron, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about what exactly Interact is.
Yeah, so Interact was actually built because, people were spending a lot of time putting all this great information right into their app and struggling to get everyone in the app to find it and digest it all. And really until now, with Interact, it's been hard to digest everything in your guide because everything is kind of segmented into its nice little own section. So what Interact serves as is really a central navigation for your app. What it does is it surfaces relevant content to each of your attendees. So whether those are sessions that are upcoming or popular or connections that of people who have recently checked in, it's going to surface that content right to the home screen of their app at perfect times based on when those when that engagement might be the most powerful. And then it's also going to allow for more informed posts. So of course, the other great aspect of Interact is attendees can raise their hand and ask a question, or they can start a discussion right on that centralized home feed. And similarly, organizers can post push messages or notifications right there, which we've talked a little bit about. But what's great about having that content and that social discussion part in the same place is that it leads to more informed posts. So instead of having people post about, what they ate for dinner or something that's not really relevant to the content of the session or the conference or the event that you're at, it's going to allow for just more informed posts about what's going on because you're seeing that information right there and you're prompted to use it in your post, right? And it makes people feel more comfortable posting about, what's going on and what's actually being discussed at the event.
Yeah, and one of the things that I particularly like about Interact is that it is individualized to the app user. So if you haven't logged in for a while and you've kind of been missing out on some of the conversation or who has recently joined into the app, that all surfaces individually for you. So it also helps to personalize the experience. And again, when we're talking about engagement, personalization is one of the key elements of that, to making a person feel as though the content that you want them to interact with is speaking directly to them. And this is a very actually low impact way to include that in your in whatever event that you are using this particular resource for. Let's kind of dig a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of Interact.